fresh off of his successful campaign to force Jeff Bezos and Amazon to treat their workers with at least some sort of minimal economic dignity. Although there are still concerns. Don't take your eye off the prize there in terms of bonuses and things like that. But overall good.
And freelance workers especially.
Freelance workers, yes. But overall good news.
Yeah.
And that's because he and Ro Khanna and others were pushing for it with a couple of bills, although they were condescended to and much derided after they put that forward. He's now got the sequel, and that is a plan to break up the big banks and avoid another horrific economic recession. So he's got a bill. It would bar financial institutions from holding assets, derivatives, and other forms of borrowing worth more than 3% of the entire US economy. That puts it at a potential cap of $584 billion in today's dollars. Now, it seems like what bank even could possibly be worth that much money?
3% of the entire
3% of the whole economy, not like of the banking sector.
No, the entire economic sector.
Which, by the way, like we're gonna break it down, but that is Bernie being really generous there.
Yeah.
You could still be like, you can be a Luxembourg in size and we'll be okay with it. So there are some that would qualify. So JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, as well as insurance giants like Prudential Financial and MetLife. All of them are bigger than that, collectively hold more than $13 trillion in assets. And that is worrying to people who have lived through the recession, lived through too big to fail, saw the bailout that we did. When you realize that all of those banks are way, way bigger than they were back then, and he would like to cap that. So what do you think of his plan?
Well, Bernie understands one thing very well, and that is that politics is effective when it channels people's anger towards an enemy, right? And the Republicans, what they do is they accurately sense people's anger and then channel it towards immigrants and Muslims and pointy-headed liberal professors.
Football players.
Yeah, exactly. Bernie, what he's doing is channeling people's anger toward the actual people that we should be angry about. Yeah, and this is what a big difference between him and most other Democrats is that most other Democrats can't do that because they're all funded by the donor class, so they can't really go after the big banks or the big Silicon Valley firms or anything like that because they've taken a lot of money from them. Bernie, because he doesn't, is allowed to do that, which is another reason why they hate him so much and why they fear him so much. But that's what this is all about. I mean, the details of the policy are, whatever, we can talk about them, but the really important thing is pointing people's attention toward the people who they should be paying attention to.
The battle here is and has always been truly the battle of the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
And we get so distracted by other things because the great distractors keep us divided, and divide and conquer is real. But one thing that I want to say is when Bernie did what he did and the Amazon deal went down, I saw a lot of people tweeting about that, how much that money, that minimum wage is still below the poverty line and all this stuff. And what I want to say is take this moment to say, we take so much time to be cynical. We're always negative and pessimistic. Not all of us, but many of us. When we have a victory, we don't know how to, assess and just have a victory. If I feel the way I feel about it, and regardless of that, I watched the video of the actual employees who were celebrating.
So inspiring.
Yeah, and I was inspired by the fact that they were happy for their victory. And those of us who use our snark and are so smug and are always like, well, that's not this. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing to make a difference? Because Bernie is not in office and he's out there marching for the people and still trying to make a change for the people. So inform yourself. And you know what I mean? I believe that the movement needs a little bit of optimism. We can't, because we can't just live in this negativity all the time. So you know what? I salute Bernie, and finally somebody's aiming the gun at the real enemy instead of us aiming it at each other.
Yeah, and look, there certainly are areas where 15 isn't enough, but I got news for you. When you launch Fight for 25, you know who's gonna show up to your rallies?
Bernie.
The Fight for 15 people, and also Bernie Sanders, by the way. And by the way, when you get them to raise the minimum wage to 15, it gets people used to the idea of, oh, maybe the minimum wage should go up every couple of decades or so, which is great. And so California did a bill recently where, it was just a couple days ago, they signed a bill where corporate boards have to have at least one woman on them. Okay, well, regardless of what you think of that, if this starts to get people to rethink the constitution of corporate boards, maybe we can make other changes. Maybe a representative of the workers could end up on there, and people get used to this sort of thing. And so Bernie did it with Amazon. He did it with Disney, by the way, pushing for them to finally get a. He was the candidate in 2016 that was pie in the sky, didn't understand how things worked, could never actually deliver. But here he is delivering for people. Generally, like with Disney, they're not in his state, by the way. They're not his constituents, but he's still doing it. So he had this to say about his bill. We spent huge amounts of money bailing them out, the banks, and they're significantly larger now than they were back then. It's time we return to that discussion, especially now for the 10th anniversary of the crash. By the way, congratulations, US, on not having the double dip recession in the first decade. That is actually good news.
Well, we're due, we're due.
We are due.
After ever since the banking deregulation in the 80s, we had the crash in 89. We had the dot-com crash in 99, 2000. We had the 2008 crash. We're kind of due for another crash.
Yeah. This would be the bird crash of 2019 or something.
Back to optimism.
Back to optimism, that's true. But I wanna be fair and give a counterpoint. So the Financial Services Forum, this is a DC-based lobbying firm that represents large financial services companies, said to address so-called too big to fail banks risks ignoring the role these banks play in supporting the global economy. This comes to you by the group that represents Bank of America, Citi, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Okay, well, they're gonna be a little bit biased there. And I understand that it's likely that in the wake of this bill, just like with the Stop Bezos Act, there are gonna be people saying it's unrealistic, it's not exactly the fix we need, maybe we should change the cap slightly up or slightly down or whatever. Look, he's getting people to focus on this and put pressure on them. We had Ro Khanna on my show to break it down. And at that point, he wasn't even super optimistic that it would work, but he thought that it was important to push the conversation in that direction. And Jeff Bezos caved within like 48 hours of that interview. We need more of this. This is why you need not just a person who hypothetically shares an ideology with you, but is an advocate for the positions that you care about, actually is willing to fight. And as Nando pointed out, it is amazing what can be accomplished when you are freed up from these donors, when you are free to pick and choose who to attack, not based on, can I get away with this, but what is right, what is wrong.
Yeah, and then the other thing that Bernie does well and he understands well, and like which was, when he was described as sort of like naive or pie in the sky or whatever, he understands that the only way progressive legislation happens is if there is sort of a mass movement of people behind it actively. So that's why he helped to activate all these, hundreds of thousands of Amazon workers, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And he understood that unless they kind of pushed for this along with him in Congress, nothing was ever gonna happen. I think often like liberals and like the way politics is covered on cable news is that like politics is like this game of like, West Wing style discussions and negotiations. And really what it is, especially on the progressive side, is it requires a mass movement of people to put a ton of pressure pointed in the particular direction that it needs to be at the right moment. And that's how he did it with Disney, that's how he did it with, and that's how the Fight for 15 has done it all over the place, wherever they've won.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.